Hey, welcome back. This module will discuss how to identify and effectively reach important audiences, constituencies, and stakeholders commonly overlooked in the health sciences, and cover strategies for translating research and scientific jargon into tailored, understandable, and attractive language for audiences that align with your research goals and agenda. I love this Nigerian proverb, the roaring lion kills no prey. For me, it kind of speaks to the reality that a lot of times vocalizing our intentions is not really that important. What's more important is our ability to connect with those who are out there to hear. Like other African programs, like other African parables, they speak to a very sort of basic principle, which is simplicity. Even casual followers of social media are familiar with memes and GIFs, or GIFs, depending on how you pronounce it, which capture moods and emotions with a vernacular all their own. I think that these visuals have become so ubiquitous because they capture the essence of communication in a way that appeals to or resonates with their audience. In her mini course on the use of evidence in policymaking, Dr. Gallus cited some of her work published in the American Journal of Managed Care examining congressional health staff's use of Twitter. Long story short, the study reported that 558 congressional health staff, of those 558, about a third, or 184, were on Twitter, and that the majority of those had public accounts. In this study, they analyzed those 115 staffers who followed about 1,273 additional professional Twitter handles. Now, only about 6% of those handles were health related, and less than 3% of those were affiliated with academic institutions. Over half were news media organizations, and more than a third were political governmental sources. Now, what's the lesson here? On social media, we tend to gravitate towards information sources, that is news media and political government sources, that are well versed in speaking our language. Academics, like myself, are notoriously bad at communicating with non-academics. I mean uneducated, I mean lay people, I mean regular, you know what I mean. So it makes sense that they come in last place. People involved in health-related professions didn't do much better, probably because of the insulated nature of working in the health equity or healthcare field. But news media outlets and journalists have to be able to break it down, to persuade and to motivate. I think that somewhere deep down in our core, what we really want is for someone to make things easy for us. There's a powerful lesson here for those of us with advanced degrees. Here's one approach. Scientists are required to communicate science and research not only to others in their field, but also to scientists and experts from other fields, as well as to public and policy makers. One fundamental suggestion with communicating with non-experts is to avoid professional jargon. However, because they're trained to speak with such highly specialized language, avoiding jargon is difficult for scientists, and there's no standard to guide scientists in adjusting their messages. In this research project, these researchers presented the development and validation of the data by an up-to-date, scientist-friendly program for identifying jargon in popular written text based on over 90 million words published in the BBC from 2012 to 2015. Here's another approach. Training in, and more importantly, practicing science communication can help researchers connect across science disciplines as well as with the general public. This particular science communication project entailed students and scientists translating their research abstracts into articles that could be easily understood by the general public. One approach was to provide science communication training, practice writing for non-specialists, and a carrot, an opportunity to create a peer-reviewed science communication article ready to submit for publication. Perhaps solving the accuracy versus accessibility problem sometimes comes with a compromise. As scientists reaching out to a general audience, we should relax our journal jargon, but also draw in our readers with other tricks like descriptive imagery and humanized storylines. There's an increasing demand for scientists to become better communicators and to engage a broader audience. This mandate is coming from a variety of directions: funding agencies, scientific journals, governments, and early career scientists themselves. Grassroots science communication trainings, such as this abstract translation project, are starting to address this need. There's also a whole lot to be said for the use of data visualization techniques. The discipline, commonly referred to as data viz, has made tremendous breakthroughs in communicating charts, graphs, tables, figures, and statistical analyses effectively. Although most of DataViz is outside the scope of this mini course, I encourage you to check out Better Presentations, a guide of scholars, researchers, and wonks by Jonathan Schwabish. Jonathan presented some of his work at a recent IRL meeting and just blew many of us away with how relevant and useful data visualization is to this work of building a culture of health. On the right, you could see a tweet in which we quoted Jonathan during one of those workshops. He's got a chart from an article, and we were having conversation about what that article, what the graph meant from the results section. And Jonathan said at one point, let's be honest, 6 people are going to read this article, and everyone sort of laughed. So this idea that, again, the impact or the readership of the science and the works that we disseminate comes into center. And lastly, so here's a screenshot for a website for Trivium BI, which is a data visualization company that JomoWorks has worked with for some time. Also excellent work. So the point here is thinking differently around all of the different sophisticated technological avenues for communicating data in visual ways that connect with research audiences as well. Lastly, I want to offer a strategy that I found in my study of indigenous research methods. As a graduate student, Sean Wilson, in 2008, wrote his entire doctoral dissertation in story form. He noted that stories enable writers to avoid abstraction and constraints dictated by Western academic discourse and allow listeners to gain life lessons and draw conclusions from their personal perspectives. Again, personal connections and perspectives being key to connecting with audiences. I'd like to point out that this dovetails nicely with our discussion of getting personal on social media from the earlier module. Just saying. He notes that research findings can be summarized in forms compatible with communication systems in post-colonial and indigenous communities, such as poems. I routinely require my master's students in community psychology to draft and present their thesis ideas as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. This ability will pay huge dividends on social media. Showing research findings as parts of a story by giving background and context information helps readers to, contextualize information and choose what's relevant for them. Similarly, project status updates can be framed as part of an ongoing story, motivating the audience to, quote, stay tuned for future episodes. In a recent interview for the groundtruthproject.org, Pian Huang discussed how Susan Joy Hassall believes journalists have the responsibility to communicate science concepts to the public in a way that they'll understand them. This is a responsibility in her view, which I totally agree with. For over 30 years, Susan Joy Hassall has helped climate scientists explain what they know to policymakers and to the public. It also seems to me that many of these issues with scientific and technical jargon have ethical implications for the informed consent process. As more and more studies are recruiting participants through social media channels, this becomes a bigger and bigger issue. According to a recent NIH study, the use of social media as a recruitment tool for research with human beings is increasing and likely to continue to grow. Despite this, to date, there have been no specific regulatory guidance and little in the bioethics literature to guide investigators on how to do this. With increased general use and penetration of social media platforms, investigators are exploring ways to utilize social media in research. In particular, social media is emerging as a promising way to identify and recruit potential participants for clinical trials and other forms of human subjects research. Social media is extremely attractive in this context because it may enable investigators both to reach wider segments of the population than they would otherwise have access to, and to target individuals on the basis of personal information that in many cases allows researchers to infer their eligibility for particular studies. So what we're talking about is our new and innovative uses for data in the process of actually conducting the study that's facilitated by social media. Thanks for hanging in there for this look on how to identify and reach our target research audiences through social media. I hope you'll join me for part 4, where we'll look at some of the basic findings and best practices from the field of social media research dissemination.